Good evening, all. Continuing our class we started last time, or the episode we started last time. We're in a class on Jesus and people and how he dealt with different people. We started with how he dealt with multitudes, moved on to prospective followers, people that indicated an interest in being a follower of his, and saw that with them he looked for obedient faith, not just simple belief. He gave them a clear choice, told them to count the cost, didn't pressure them or beg them. Sometimes he was a little bit mysterious with them, in fact. Moved on from there to talk about disciples. And disciples are a little step above prospective followers. They've become followers, perhaps not 100% of the time, but when he was in the area or something, they probably came to hear him, see him, hang out with him as much as they could. And quite a few times in the Gospels, it talks about him talking to his disciples and dealing with them and how he dealt with them. So we spent last week getting started on that. And there's a little more detail to all these as we go along. And next week, hopefully, we'll get up to the apostles, and he spends a lot of time with the apostles. But disciples, we talked about some of the things he did. He corrected them. They came to him with wrong ideas, wrong priorities. And we looked at a number of situations where he talked about that to them and corrected them. He forced decisions. He didn't accommodate everyone, let's say. He made them decide if they really wanted to follow him or not. And sometimes, one time in particular, it says after he had said some hard sayings that some of them quit following. They didn't follow him anymore. And we just got started on the fact that he taught them. So we'll continue with that today. The part we started with was the parables and how he taught them in parables, and sometimes he explained them and sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he just told a parable and went on to something else. In fact, a number of times, not a lot of times, but a few times, either the apostles or a smaller group of disciples would get him afterwards and say, "What did that mean?" And sometimes he'd explain it to them. So he taught a lot in parables. I've always wanted to be brave enough to preach a sermon that was just a pure parable, and then just tell it and then quit. I've never been able to force myself to do that. I always think, I got to explain this. But Jesus did a lot. He just told them a parable and went on to something else. Okay, so we'll move on tonight to Luke chapter 11. And you can read the first 13 verses, and we'll read some of them as we finish this slide. But at the start of it, it says, "Now Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, 'Lord, teach us to pray, as John taught his disciples.' And he said to them, 'When you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name,'" and it goes on with what we call the Lord's Prayer. Wasn't really the Lord's Prayer. It's probably more accurately called the Disciples' Prayer, but it was not a rote prayer for everybody to say. It was a sample of here's how you pray. You put these things in a prayer. So he gave them a sample prayer, and then following, starting in verse 5, let's keep reading. Chapter 11, verse 5. after he had finished what we call the Lord's Prayer, he went on and he said, "And he said to them, which of you has a friend will go to him at midnight and say to him, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine has arrived on a journey, and I have nothing to set before him.' And he will answer from within, 'Do not bother me. The door is shut, and my children are with me in bed. I can't get up and give you anything.' I tell you, though he will not get up and give him anything, because he is his friend, yet because of his impudence, he will rise and give him whatever he needs. And I tell you, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. What father among you, if his son asks for a fish, will instead of a fish give him a serpent? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If you then, who are evil, know how to get good gifts for your children, how much more will the Heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" All right, so my point with reading that is that in teaching his disciples, they asked him, how do we pray? And so he told them how to pray, or what to say, what kind of things to say. And then he taught them about prayer. He went on and explained to them that you need to be persistent in prayer. There's another story he tells very similar to that one about being persistent and continuing to ask. And then he says, those who ask will receive, and those who seek will find, and those who knock it'll be open. And then he talks about a good father won't give his son something bad if he asks for something good. And if you understand that as humans, think how much more the Heavenly Father will give you what you ask for if you ask for good things. So that's not all the teaching he did on prayer, but in that little story there in Luke, he taught them a sample prayer, and then he taught them about prayer. And I'm sure all of these things we're looking at, he did a lot more of that as he traveled with the disciples. But he taught them about prayer or how to pray, and then about prayer. All right, let's look at one more, Luke chapter 12. You can read the whole thing in 22 to 31. Actually, we got time to do that. Let's do that. He starts out and he says to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat, nor about your body, what you'll put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you're not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor to be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows what you need, that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you." Okay, so he teaches them here about being anxious about things of this world. And he tells them not to be anxious. I know you've heard lots of sermons on that passage that I just read, but very, very few followers of Christ, disciples of Christ, really get where they do that to the level he's talking about. He says, don't worry about it. Don't be anxious about it. Just seek his kingdom and he'll take care of it. Uh, and like I said, it's a whole sermon right there, and we're not going to go there, but listen to the things he said. He said, look at the birds. God takes care of them. He said, and if you want to be anxious about something, could you add 1 hour to your life? If you can't do that, why are you being anxious about everything else? The lilies in the field, they get clothed. Talks about being of little faith and seeking the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. There are a few people that get close to that level, I think. I think probably of all the things I've ever read or heard or seen, George Mueller was probably as close to understanding this passage as anybody. And we don't have time to tell George Mueller's story. Can't remember, I think it was a 4 or a 6 sermon series I did about George Mueller one time. George understood this. He wasn't anxious about anything and just told God what he wanted and expected it to show up. And it did. So that was one of the things Jesus taught them. Okay, so we've looked at the third point. He taught them in parables. He taught them about prayer. He taught them about worry or being anxious. All right, last one we're going to look at is he warned them. Matthew 23. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. Okay, so interesting to me that one of the things he warned his disciples about was the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, and hypocrisy in general for that matter, but hypocrisies of the scribes and Pharisees and the religious leaders. He starts out and he says they're in Moses' seat, which doesn't mean they had the authority of Moses, but they had the highest authority in religion in that day. Bear in mind that the people Jesus was talking to didn't have a Bible on the shelf at home. They didn't have the Old Testament to check what Moses said. What they knew about it was handed down by oral tradition, by being repeated on Passover and other feasts like that, and by listening to the scribes and Pharisees, the ones that taught in public. And so Jesus says, you know, they're in Moses' seat. They're basically teaching the law. So observe what they tell you, but don't do what they do. Because they preach, but they don't practice it. They're hypocrites. What they're teaching you is legitimate when it comes from the law, and later, especially with the apostles, he draws a distinction between what they taught as law and what they taught as tradition. He understood following the law, but he didn't mess with tradition. In the sense he didn't follow it. So he says they're teaching legitimately the law, and you can follow what they're teaching you about that, but don't practice what they do. Now, we could take time and read the rest of chapter 23, but I'm going to save that till we get to the apostles, because I think he is teaching them more about that as he talks there. But if you read the rest of chapter 23, that's one of the harshest chapters in the Bible. 7 woes on the Pharisees, and he just goes from one to one about, woe to you Pharisees, and tells them what they do wrong. They didn't take kindly to that, but Jesus called them out publicly. But for our purpose, what we need to understand is that he was not just calling them out publicly to correct them, but like that first verse there says, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, scribes and Pharisees teach the law legitimately. You can follow that, but they don't practice what they preach. And then he turns and addresses them directly. I say he turns. I don't think he turned. They were probably mixed in the crowd. But he calls out the Pharisees. And 23 is a very, very harsh chapter about all the things that they do wrong. He mentions a couple here in this part. They tie up heavy burdens. They lay them on people's shoulders, but they don't worry about them. And they do all their deeds to be seen by others. We probably should talk about that just a little bit. A number of the woes that he calls out on them are because of the way they do everything to be seen. They don't do it with the right attitude or to worship or to anything else good. They just do it to look religious. And like I said, we'll save most of that till we get to the apostles. All right, let's do one more warning. So he warned them about hypocrisy, which is interesting in talking to people that want to follow him. And then Luke 16's the next one I selected. Luke 16, verses 1 through 14, and we won't read all of it, but we'll start and finish. At the end of it, he says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And then verse 14 says, the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. All right, so, and I've mentioned this before in Jesus' teaching, I think this is the one that's probably one of the most surprising things in this whole study of how Jesus dealt with people. If you sat down to think of all the things that Jesus might tell his followers, my list would probably put money pretty low because they didn't have any. These were poor people. By our standards, they're ridiculously poor. The Pharisees evidently had accumulated some money, stealing from widows and everything else. But in general, Jesus' followers were not from the upper crust. These were people that lived in a tent maybe, or a mud shack, and had a few kitchen utensils, and that was about it. And Jesus still makes this one of his most consistent warnings. Not just here in Luke, but a number of times. Jesus talked a lot about money. And that just strikes me as, on one hand, strange, and on the other hand, it's a warning. If these people needed to be warned about how dangerous money was, and you couldn't serve both God and money with all the things that we have, how much more should we be taking a warning? So I find that extremely interesting that Jesus talked about that so much to his disciples. So let's recap here a little bit. People that decided to follow him. that became called disciples. He corrected them, both their errors and their priorities. He forced decisions. He said hard things sometimes. He taught them in parables and in prayer and about worry. And he warned them about hypocrisy and materialism. So, there it is. How's all that apply? All the things we've looked at, how's that apply in 2026? Assuming that we call ourselves disciples of Christ, what would he tell us? Reminds me, I saw a meme the other day, a T-shirt or something that said, if Paul was around, we'd be getting a letter. If Jesus was around, talking to us, addressing the Wednesday night crowd of his disciples, what would he tell us? How would we apply these things that he seemed to tell his disciples? So let's work through these a little bit. First of all, who are our disciples? Assuming we're trying to do what Jesus did, assuming we're walking in his steps. We've talked about how we deal with the multitudes, how we deal with prospective followers. Well, how would we deal with disciples? Somebody that wants to be a follower, that comes out of the world or out of another religion or out of whatever and says, I want to be a follower of Jesus Christ. How would we approach that? How would we deal with them in the terms of this series of lessons? Okay, well, first thing Jesus did was he corrected them. Okay, so there is some correcting to do when a new disciple comes along. And I say a new disciple, sometimes it's an old disciple that needs some correcting. But there is a correcting of both errors and priorities that needs to be done. And it's easy to think about new converts as new disciples, but perhaps we should think of a little broader picture than that. How about the kids and grandkids growing up in your house? Are they disciples that need learning? Do they need some correction about things that are wrong or that their priorities are out of whack? I think so. I think that's a big task for the home and for that wing down there. Well, that wing down there too, for that matter. Discipling. Disciples need taught, corrected in things that are wrong and in their priorities. So maybe we should think a little more seriously about how we do that. Some churches have a very rigorous system of that. Series of classes that you go through to learn about being a disciple. Maybe it's better handled some other way, but it shouldn't be ignored. That was Jesus' priority with his disciples, was when they came to him with a wrong idea from their old life, he straightened them out. Yeah, no, that's not right. When they had a wrong priority, when they looked at the importance of food and other things that we talked about with the disciples, he pointed them to a higher priority. So correction probably has a place in our life in dealing with disciples. Okay, second one, he forced decisions. He said things that were hard to take. He told them things that they didn't like. Okay? Of all of them, that's probably one of the most, I'm not sure I'd say it's the biggest one we've got to think about today, but it's certainly a biggie today because there is a mentality that there isn't truth. Okay. When they came to Jesus and he said, "This is the way it is," some of them quit following him. But he didn't accommodate them. He didn't say, "Okay, if that's the way you want it, we'll let that go too." Truth is truth, and that's not the spirit of this age. The spirit of this age is that whatever I think is truth. And that may be truth for you, but that doesn't work for me. Okay? Well, if we're dealing with disciples, and to some extent with the multitudes and prospective followers, we talked about that already, but especially with disciples, Jesus forced decisions. He said, "This is the way it is." Okay? And it's easy to get off on the moral questions of the day, and I will for just a little bit, but we don't want to go there too long because some people hear it and think he's talking political. I'm not. I'm talking about the truth of this book. What prompted me to talk about this is I saw some headlines on news feed the last couple of weeks or so. There's a fellow in Texas running for Senate. I'll go ahead and use his name. Hopefully I don't promote him too much, but James Tallarico. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a rising star, shall we say. He's a Democrat. But he's also a graduate of a seminary, and he's I don't know if he's ordained or not, but he's a minister of some sort in the Presbyterian Church. And his political campaigning includes a lot of Bible. Okay. And I just took a quick Google through and looked up some of the headlines about him. Let me just read you a couple. One headline said, "James Tallarico is living up to the hype by staying true to his faith." Okay. We'll come back to that, but kind of underline that his faith. He's staying true to his faith. Here's a quote from one newspaper. Texas State James Tallarico's Senate bid is offering a vision of Christianity that fits comfortably within the left and giving Democrats uneasy with religion permission to engage with it on their own terms. Okay. Another quote, "His outspokenness on providing a fresh and progressive interpretation of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Okay. And if you're familiar with the news and him, you know some of the things he said, but he supports abortion, transgenderism, gay marriage, et cetera, et cetera. Transgender, I think he thinks there's 6 genders. He says God is non-binary. There's another quote from him. "Other religions of love," he starts, "Christianity points to the truth, but other religions of love point to the same truth. He views Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism as circling the same truth about the universe, about the cosmos, and that truth is inherently a mystery. Okay, now that may sound really odd to you from a very conservative Christian background. That is not very unusual in mainstream Protestantism. That is pretty much the position of all of the old mainstream religions. You look up their websites, and that's what's on the front page. All of the social justice matters, et cetera, et cetera. One of the pictures of Tallarico preaching at his congregation, they have a rainbow flag draped over the cross at the back of the stage. Okay. Now, I bring all that up not to be political, but to think about how Jesus taught disciples. Okay. And when they came to him with wrong ideas, he said, no, that's not the way it is. Now, obviously, he was the Son of God, so he had a little authority there. But he didn't accommodate. He didn't say, okay. And he talked a lot about being separate from the world, etc. And what Tallarico and most mainstream religious groups have done is accommodate the world. Okay? They actually do force decisions, but they force them the other way. They accommodate what the spirit of the age is and find a way in the Bible to get around it. And some of them make a little bit of sense, and some of them make no sense. One of Tallarico's points is abortion is okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with abortion. It's not a matter of whether it should be legal or illegal. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay. His biblical argument for that is that when the angel came to Mary, he consulted her first before she became pregnant. And his tagline is, you can't force someone to create. If Mary hadn't have agreed, the angel wouldn't have impregnated her. Okay, some of you are looking at me like that doesn't make sense. Well, I'm sorry. I'm just quoting Representative Tallarico. He finds something in the Bible to justify what he wants. Okay, now, just compare that to how Jesus dealt with people that came to him and had errors, that wanted to believe something else, that wanted to do something else. He didn't go for it. He said, here's how it is, and you can follow or not. Okay, I get a little off track. I mentioned that they accommodate the world, but the mainstream religions still force a decision by people who want to hold on to biblical morality, and they leave. If you look at the statistics, it's been a horrible marketing decision, if you want to put it that way, for all mainstream religions. From the time that they started embracing, I'll use the term woke for lack of a better one, for the time they began embracing all of the woke moral positions, their membership has just gone downhill at a 45-degree angle. I read one today, listened, and I thought, well, maybe it appeals to young people. Well, people under 40, 2% are in a mainline religious denomination. So, hadn't worked very well. But it has accomplished what they want, evidently, or what somebody wanted. Okay, so excuse me if you think any of that was political. It wasn't. It is just making us think about when somebody comes from the world with ideas of the world or ideas of this, that, or the other, there is a truth that Jesus enforced, and I think we ought to also. Third thing, he taught them in parables and prayer and about worry. We ought to teach disciples, and we ought to warn disciples about things. The two that I picked from his warnings, and they were the two main warnings. Bear in mind, this isn't all I got. I got a list of everything he warned them about, and religious hypocrisy and materialism are way up there. They're the top two. Okay, now, when and where do we do this? 25 minutes on Sunday morning, going to cut it for new disciples? Probably not. Probably need a little more than that. Classes should be a place where we correct and teach and warn and do all of that. Small groups are a good place. People can talk and bring up their own ideas, and the group, if it's mature enough and biblical enough, will say, I don't think so. One-on-one, we ought to be doing it. Probably ought to do more mentoring than we do. Probably ought to make more time for teaching disciples. All right, we ran out of time, the buzzer said. No drama tonight, so that I know of, so you're free to visit with yourselves. And next week, we will move on to the apostles. How did Jesus deal with the 12? And he spent a lot of time with them and dealt differently with them than he did with everybody else. All right, thanks for your attention.